Good. Hello.
Hi, Linda.
Hello. Um, Perhaps we can start with you talking about how would you define the scene of expanded music based on the research you did.
And first of all, I will tell you how I see the word scene, right? And personally, I
Mhm.
like very much the term network and actor network theory. But I like as well, but I would prefer to use scene and not network. First of all, the term scene, it's a little bit broader. So when you define the scene, here, right, we see that there are um, academically trained composers. There is academical trained musicians. There is universities or educational programs. There is the founders, and no doubt there is a paradigm, right, which is shared. And maybe if there is instruments, and you can add and add, and this all is together this theme. But of course, you can say in elaborated way, you can say this is all is in some kind of network. And I think difference between network and scene is on that the scene there is some common, right? We always talking about some kind of community in that way. So that's communal aspect. That's why I prefer to use scene, not network. And right, this is about generally how I see that the term, right? Uh, what term scene is, and then of course what is a scene, expanded music scene, and an expanded music scene. I think it consists of some several important layers. First of all, I think most participants are academically trained, so which you will not find in other music scenes. But here, I think almost majority by far is academically trained. So it's one thing. I think there is a shared paradigm, and basically the shared paradigm based on that it's that we need to somehow music expand from different elements, just combining musical languages or semias versus non-musical ones. We combine music with other arts. We combine music with technologies. We can combine music with different medias, and this is some kind of that we always want somehow this see about expanding musical music and musical language. Second part, I think it's always about multisensorial. This paradigm always stresses that you not only music, you not only listen, but you experience from all senses. And I think personally that they are very much innovative. Innovativeness is very important. That's why if you will say the two things, this paradigm differs from other, and this link to academia.
All right, but you said that these composers are predominantly academically trained, so therefore,
And musicians
how
too,
global?
right?
Yes, people perform. Yeah, how global can that scene be then?
I think it is.
Because we can say that like music education predominantly like that kind of happens, that kind of music that you are talking about predominantly happens in the Western world. And even if composers from other continents choose to come and study here, is can that really be truly global scene?
Well, it's a good question. No doubt it's global scene, at least in the smaller frame, what you said, right? So what we see, and it's from my interviews, most of it's easy. I have more than 100 interviews, and I think half of that was from Europe and half of that from other continents. So basically, there is represent this scene, uh, musicians and composers. You will find in in many places all around the world. Yeah, I think it's true that it's more concentrated in Europe and United States. At least I felt that. Intuitively, right, when I didn't do this statistical analysis, but I somehow, looking back to those who I interviewed, looking back to those, uh, and I think it acts a little bit as a network as well, and this commons, uh, and it is global. I think it's global due to as well as we are living in more global world, technologies and etc. For example, there was a case 2 years ago, one South American composer, she died, and and this information actually was sent by some PhD student who study in Australia, but he was originally from Southeast Asia. Now, currently, he works in Europe as assistant professor. So I think there is this commons, even it's a very small world, but it's if you look on geography, it's expanded. Yes, there is true that it's the core maybe is Europe, but in a way that you are saying, could it be like globally important scene everywhere in the world? Then I would say no, but I would say in Europe, it's not in any way, it's not a dominating scene, right? By far, right? There are other scenes which gets more people attention than
Mhm.
expand music.
Uh, all right, but because if we look at the expanded music scene from the perspective of it, I mean, how it comes about, which is that it's related to, of course, education and resources and these various networks that allow for its continuation and evolution, which are, I would say, predominantly financial, then I think the question is really, okay, so it can be a global scene because people who then choose to study music from this kind of academic institutionalized perspective, they choose to come to Western Northern Hemisphere countries where there are universities and degrees, and maybe then choose to go back home and so on. But therefore, how can this be the evolution of this practice and the scene can be looked from a colonial perspective if it's so deeply tied to this being, perpetuated through like Western means. Of course, it's a very globalized world, and it's very hard to disentangle things like that. But I'm thinking more about, okay, so there's an expanded scenes. It uses these different elements, and it needs resources. It needs particular venues, and I don't know, technology, and so on. And therefore, it is very much tied to infrastructure resources that is more readily available in the, let's call it, West, for lack of perhaps
Yes.
more expansive understanding. So how can this be looked at? How do you look at it? Or have you, because I know I've seen your YouTube channel, there are composers of different origin, but also residing in also African countries and Southeast Asia and so on. And how does it pan out around the world? If it's a global scene, that how differently does it pan out? I mean, yes, we both are European, so I mean, I'm not that interested in Germany. I'm more interested. I'm more interested in looking at this from the perspective of these from this colonial perspective.
Yes, from colonial perspective, it's a good question. And actually, before our interview, I thought a lot about it. I, I personally, I think this is very traumatic dramatic, dramatic questions, particularly to Western academic music, because whatever we can say, but it was true that I think, wait, 4 or 5 centuries, we dominated, West dominated the other parts of the world. We literally colonized them, and we literally trained them to play Western academic music. It happened here in South America. It's somehow partly, maybe about this is question mark from interviews. I don't know precisely. I know that South America, I know that partly it happened. So it's in Indonesia, I suppose, maybe less. And yes, from and we can say we like it or not, but it was act of colonization, and Western academic music was part of it. And then, of course, was this when this colonial relationship broke down, right? It was mostly after Second World War, right? We don't talk about much. And then I think started this post-colonial era, which again, when basically in some parts of the world, the good music was still Western music and and Western academic music. And then of course, there was, at least I remember from interviews in South America, there was a time when all this decolonization happened, when they tried to see what kind of damage to local music and local musics, and this landscape made this colonization, and they tried to rebuild it some kind of back to origins. But in that way, still, we can say about some kind of post-colonial relationship, even if it wasn't forced by power, but it was forced by this symbolical power when you define what good music is and what's not. And I think, and this is the past, right? And now at least what I can find from several interviews, that there is this new trend, when maybe not trend, but a new situation when, for example, composers from Colombia and also from Indonesia, they're not talking about that they are more less here. It's less. They have less here this type of relationship when one dominates another, when one music, and they're trying to some kind of start integrating different musics, and then somebody's in Indonesia, it calls new post-soul music. So basically, it means that you broke down this power relationship. But still, I think understanding that actually in the core, it was always colonial. After that, it was post-colonial. Of course, there is these traumas related to that music, right? So it would be very hard to avoid that. And I think it's less, if you will see some other music streams which are more newer ones, of course they don't have this, they have less connected to these collective drums than Western academic music, because Western academic music was part of colonial music. Classical music was part of colonial music in many places in the world.
Yeah. I guess I think about access to infrastructure when I think about expanded music, with the awareness that access even to like electricity or internet or I don't know, various kind of things that we in the Western world take completely for granted. It's just always there, and it's accessible. It's like I don't think we can even conceptualize that this isn't always a given. So obviously even being able to do this kind of practice that uses quite a lot of, it's a quite carbon footprint heavy and uses various devices and needs access to various infrastructure technology, renders this music still, I mean, the expanded scene still really heavily Western/Northern Hemisphere. So I'm interested to know from your research, from the interviews you conducted, yes, what are the trends in the expanded scene, but also how do they play out in different parts of the world based on yes access and you know like this is now a bit tangential, but because you mentioned this bringing other elements, obviously it's a process. It will take so as or longer or as long as the domination that Western people, you know, white people conducted around the world. Or although there's acceleration, so let's hope not as long. But it is. I remember I went to visit my brother in Brussels, and I went to the Congo Museum, which I thought was one of the one of the better examples of trying to bring awareness, if nothing else, to the country and to the culture that was so heavily oppressed and like from extracted from the wealth was extracted from to to create the wealth of Belgium. And the really quite moving thing was that the kind of colonial past of that country was put towards the end of the museum trip or whatever. However, the beginning was just really dealing with the land and the biodiversity, the culture, the language, the music and the dress code and everything. And and then just even on this one example, but I mean the world has so many different countries and culture. I just understand it's incredibly rich. And the things I have no idea about, the amount of languages and the rhythmical, organization of the polyrhythms that is obviously completely kind of like the Baroque music was at that time understood without notation because it was part of the sound culture of that time. The same as like polyrhythmic understanding and in that particular Congolese culture, like about how music is organized and so on. And I just then understood, very, in a very, very fractional way, that basically how much of knowledge, because of this domination and oppression and extractive practices, is really obviously obscured from us, and how much the music also is limited in this container of Western knowledge. So I'm more interested as to knowing how, through this combination of elements, or somewhere else that Western, the music changes, and what are the trends there, really?
Yeah, it's interesting question. As I see, right, expanded music is always when you combine, right, when you combine different, let's say Western music, most probably Western music, its core of Western music post the Second World War, avant-garde with some other semi-spheres. You combine music semi-sphere with non-musical semi-spheres. And I think what's really happened, what is interesting, is that here in the West, right? It's so basically how I feel that composers, they are not extracted from what's going around them and what's going around in their societies and in their lives. And then there is, we see the composers which combines and are more very much into technologies, because this is something which which our societies are adapting very fast and creating very fast, and then they see, okay, this combination could be through technological means. Basically, those are, of course, in the West, and some of them, of course, there are some people who has this mindset, not only in the West but outside the West. And then, of course, there are all these diversity issues, which you could see both, let's say, in I would say North, in global North, and then you can see in South as well. But again, I would say mostly North, and mostly as well as there where you see. But in North, it's more about gender and race. But here, for example, I noticed that there is some movement of first how to go indigenous composers in Australia. So they even trying to build a little bit artificially, so that there is something to voice, so that they can still tell those stories. And then, of course, what you see, for example, in China, when there is traditional music, when then there is this Western music, and they are taught, and then this intersection, the same in, I think, I remember in Egypt when I was, so that there is this Oriental music, and then there is Western music, and I think, and in Indonesia as well. So basically, what I want to say, I think this revealing element when you can combine, and then there is no any more hierarchies. They so the composers combine different things from their life and their environment, and then there is, of course, some kind of things or what happens in their music, right? Let's say not in the non-West societies, and they usually what is the element that they usually find some interesting things in their music histories, and then they combine. Right? We have quite many composers, and there was quite many festivals, as an actually this combination was put in the program in the West. And from that perspective, I always say to my Latvian colleagues, there is something, right? When you came from Asia, or you came from Africa, or you came from South America, it's a little bit advantage for them as well, because they have something which something in their surroundings which may be interesting for other parts in the world, if it's somehow combined with understanding, or let's say with elements which is much easier to let's say which connects, right? And this connector could be this Western music, or or at least some practices of that.
Mhm.
So your question is, yes, it's happening actually. So there is a trend, and you combine it, right?
Yeah, because the interesting thing is that obviously music is not only a personal expression and relates to the circumstances, culture, environment in which it arises, but also it is some kind of commentary and dialogue with the public. So then in different places of the world, based on different infrastructure resources, it will serve different needs. And so in terms of expanded music scene, what role does it serve in different societies, and how does it integrate with these different societies? And maybe really let's exclude global north, because we know it's their festivals, we know the venues, and we understand that. But if we are talking about the global scene of these different possibilities, resources, and available infrastructure, then how does this particular type of music relate to these different worlds.
Mhm.
And I mean, of course, they're different worlds, different places. So it's one can't really generalize. So maybe some examples could really help to understand that
Uh,
based on your research.
so there's several questions. One is about institutions. I think there is a part in the world where only some kind of this, when there is no institutionalization, and I think it only happens very slowly. I remember interviews from Southeast Asia. It's happening, and it's quite much institutionalized in South America, particularly I remember from Colombia. They're developing those programs. And some institutionalization happen in China. At least I have the interviews that there are some. They're very much on technologies. So there are some. So this is one thing, and but if but I would say as well that it's and it's very hard. I think in Iran, is what I understand from there is that there are some kind of composers and they are institutionalized. But it's more easy even electronic music to be institutionalized inside. So there's a lot of those Iranian artists. They usually, which I know composers, they still rely on commissions from Western world, and I think this happens. So, but regarding but we can see a lot of things where there is no institution and still there some music exists. And I think in reality, it's of course if you think about Alexander Schubert type of things, it's very costly. But meanwhile, if you think about only like cross genre interdisciplinary works where you combine with theater or dance, it's not so costly. If you think about technologies, some technologies are costly, but meanwhile, we need to understand that this all centuries about democratizing technology and technological access. So it's not anymore so huge privilege. So you don't need to be an IRCAM in order to create some very complicated music, right? Software-based music. So software is there. The same thing we go with videos. So you can shoot video with your smartphones. I wouldn't say that it's so demanding. I think just Western part, in particular Europe, is just privileged. This music are just privileged. But whether this music exists or not is not exist due to the privilege. Do we need privilege so that society invests in that music very much in order to exist? I wouldn't say. It could exist without, and we know a lot of examples where it could exist. I know that there are in Indonesia there are some artists who does that, and they started on very grassroots in Africa as well, right? In Egypt as well, right? So it's so it could be, of course, what I want to say. It could be expensive as here, but I think entry level, all what made this century, entry level costs are very low. Yes, we can talk about privilege, but privilege is mostly again a Western part of the world and mostly Europe. Uh, and regarding roles, I don't know. There is normative idea of the role, which usually is that we say normative things, but I think which is not reality. Normative things is that okay, this is so we need to this is like part of innovative music, and we are some kind of R&D lab, R&D house for music in general. So we invest money, and it's somehow we find new ways, and then these ideas could go to other music scenes, and maybe there's some kind of later on commoditization opportunity, but which I don't believe so much happens. Maybe it happens, but it's at least not very straightforward. And then there is second, okay, that we are as other arts, so we are creating some kind of alternative perspectives, and then these perspectives somehow we expand horizons, but and in that way we impact. But in reality, I think we really impact, and our real impact is very small, and I think we have only normative roles, so we don't play some crucial role in societies.
Okay. I guess you mentioned just now that obviously it depends on what one engages in when it comes to the expansion. And then you said innovating music. And I thought, obviously, we innovated from this perspective of pure sound music that was so prevalent in Western tradition. And while I just thought, well, in other cultures, it's not so uncommon to have, I don't know, music and dance, music and painting, or like something. Obviously, it becomes a bit more complicated when there's like a screen involved, but also perhaps not that costly. And like, what's the potential of the evolution of this expanded practice in terms of some kind of change, or fostering engagement? Like we always hope to have some kind of dialogue with people and the public. It's not just, yes, it exists, and that's who engages, but yeah,
right. We want dialogue with people, but our previous generations made music for musicians, right? So it's right. I don't know.
But doesn't because obviously in global north, like it is a heavily funded. I mean, funded music, institutionalized within that network of festivals and state funding and so on. Does it receive this kind of state funding in different places, or is it more grassroots?
This I don't know, but I know. Okay, this I can say from several interviews only where it was mentioned. There was, as I said, I spoke with a composer from Iran who lived in Iran. Now he moved to Europe. There was no state funding; it was commission. As I understand I spoke with from Japan, it's the same story. At least it was regarding history and Southeast Asia, I think, as well. So in many countries, it's not this privilege it's not stay. It's not the privilege of that privilege. They don't have it. It's I would say it's mostly here in Europe.
So the music evolves differently. So it perhaps has a potential because of I think we are also about to run out of time, but just mentioning it. So if we're stopped, then we can restart in the next conversation. Anyway, because it evolves like in this.
So restart, right?
Yeah, but now I'm trying to remember what I said. I think it was related to the potential of fostering some kind of impact change or dialogue with the public, with the audience. I understand you said musicians were always doing music for musicians. I don't necessarily think that's true, but But recently I went to a gig here in Leeds where I was a collective, as far as I understand, a collective from China, from Beijing. Um, and two of them were using exactly the same setup. So they had a table with these different devices, but their approach was so different. So they were not resetting stage. They just used the same table, but differently. I found it very interesting. But I also didn't notice it in the moment. So it's also quite interesting. And a friend told me that uh, their sort of DIY, more like, experimental scene happens like differently than it is in let's say the UK or other European countries where you have these venues and you go to a gig. It mostly happens in people's flats. So the people that play for a very different audience, but also just like the scope is different. The work then has also different dimension because it happens in somebody's living room. Let's say for 10 people, of course, then you work with amplification differently. You work with let's say the energy of the physicality of the performance differently. So I thought it was very interesting, and it was really visible in the performance that just in the environment, the circumstances that they work with really determine. Obviously, I mean that's quite clear, but determine the evolution of their practice and so on, and their approach, and even how they uh, design their instruments. So I just want to hear from you about the research you did, because of course, yes, how people write pieces, that's all very interesting, but then they have to also present it somewhere, of course, fund it somehow, but present it somewhere, and then how does it look in different places where, let's say, the infrastructure, the network of festivals is perhaps, as far as I understand, less developed. And how does this expanded music, demonstrate in different places? Or
Uh,
is it,
I have never
or
asked those questions, so I only can say
uh,
some few of that what I felt. I think Janis Kyriakidis said that he noticed that basically everything, at least in his country, in it's Netherlands, so that there is a trend going away from concert halls. And I think this is, I remember my time when I spent in Berlin as well. So concert hall doesn't mean a lot for for expanded music or new music in general, but for expanded music as well. So it's going away. I have never been, so I think in New York the same, or it's very small concert halls from when I was in New York 7 years ago, where I spent some time. In Egypt, I think I spent 1 month in Cairo, and there was no, at least I haven't never experienced anything like that, like expanded music concert. So I know that there was a festival before, but it just disappeared. Uh, Sometimes, at least what I remember from those conversations in Egypt, some composers, some of them mostly are invited and do something in some kind of collaboration projects between Africa and Europe. So that's a story. That's true story as well. Uh, but there are like projects I remember in South Africa, and there's I wouldn't say it's particularly expanded music, maybe example, but it's the music which mixes genres, classical music or and contemporary, as well as contemporary music with rock music. There was a composer of that. They had this, they played in the bars. So I think that's one thing. I think yes, that's I think it's the general things that contemporary music and particularly expanded music it can it can happen everywhere and concert halls. The role of concert halls diminishing, right? Okay, that's what at least what I can say from my observations. I don't know whether it's some factual based or it's only like so I saw that, but I at least I remember. Yes, I said Yanis saw the same story there. So I don't think that it's so much important concert halls, and the same thing in the rig. It happens as well, right? I think there is a huge thing of revitalization of old industrial spaces. There is a lot of concerts happening there, right? So
Yeah, I didn't quite mean that we need concert halls for expanded music, precisely because I suppose that also influences how we think, what we think expanded music is or can be. So different places and environment, because it's a
yeah, but expanded music could be as a book as well, like Franz
yeah, yeah.
Ferdinand, right? He writes his encyclopedia, his imagined encyclopedia of him, right? And then a big part is the music, and this music you can only imagine, right? Mm,
Mhm.
in with imaginative ways. Then the book is like concert hall, or Kreidler creates those interesting graphics with Volvo, right? So I don't know. So I think it it expands in that way as well.
Mhm.
So you don't yeah. So the media where the music is communicated, it's it's it varies. Yes, but I think there is one common. There is, I would say, even so that it could be outside concert halls, it could be bars, it could be books, it could be paintings,
Oh, yeah.
graphics, etc. But I think there is one common thing, simple, and I think YouTube is a very important place, important media. I would say it's not. Yeah, I think YouTube. There is, of course, YouTube and Vimeo competition, but mostly I think it's I think it's YouTube. So I think if you will say this music should be in the YouTube, right? This I think is one thing, and yes, and I think this as well as distinguishing between other music scenes, even contemporary music scenes. So for them, it could be the music could play in SoundCloud, they could be played in radios, but this music cannot be played in SoundCloud. I cannot imagine that you could play Samstein Anderson piano concerto and only in SoundCloud. It doesn't make any sense for me at least, right? So that's why I think yeah maybe YouTube is this let's say global concert hall, right?
Yeah, but I mean, yes, there are all these different media through which that music can come into dialogue with the audience, like, and it can be also this kind of very remote, audience that we don't see, and the influence is also something we can't really quite measure.
Right? We had a point on the conversation that I stated music is actually it was not my idea. It was the idea of before. It was all critique what I understand from composers, which actually is one part of expanded music at least. As composers, they are trying to not rebel, but to create alternative to all these extended music techniques and then one tragedy was that the new post second part particularly is that, but not only before them as well, right? This post Second World War that they pushes away music and music become more formalized, more complex, more for musicians. But and then of course is this they're trying to revitalize, they're trying to make it more interesting. That's true as well. But if you will look particularly that this is only like Europe driven music, maybe Europe and United States, but mostly Europe, right? Let's say Europe. Let's imagine that it's Europe at some point. Europe was driver and it is still driver. Then in Europe, this is becoming privileged. This is a privileged field. Basically, the field doesn't not necessarily need this huge audio engagement. This is like institutionally built like that. So you don't get money from audience. You basically get money from the state, or you get money from festival. And this is different the way how other music scenes no operate. In that way, it's on an institutional mechanism. It's not so much interested in whatever we are saying, but we are not so much interested in. And then this actually reflects some. I remember some conversations when composers saying the ultimate audience is me, right? So at the beginning, I should start liking the audience, right? And which could be not the case in maybe I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine that this could be not the case in many music streams, right? Whereas this idea of the audience and the need for audience and audience voice is bigger.
I came to mind all this like postcard art. I don't know, in the 70s or whatever there was, that Fluxus were sending postcards with scores, and there was all these different projects which were spanning different locations, and yeah, they had just different reason to be continued. Then just they were, I think their aim was obviously different than to just create this one performance, but rather to create a different way or alternative way of thinking about living through art practice, music practice, sound practice. I don't know, like, so that is what perhaps finding alternative presentation modes for music, which I think expanded music has that potential, can give society, public, whoever that is. It can be only like 3 people or 10 people, but different ways of thinking about the role of music, creativity, art in life.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I think it could be so, but first of all, my interview doesn't reveal that, right? Because I interview only composers, so I have never interviewed those who actually attended, watch, who experienced, or who listen. Mm-hmm. So it's completely.
And where
this is a normative idea. It's still very small. Audiences are very small. Impact is imagined because we need to say, okay, of course we have a privilege, right? We have a historical privilege, and we need to find ways how to maintain this privilege, right? And then we are trying to build up such stories, which actually I think doesn't exist. And I think that's somehow here I'm more with Francois Cherin, with my friend Francois Cherin, that it's just that there is no role, there is no impact, and maybe there is no future of being privileged next 500 years. Okay, 5 centuries, that's for sure. It won't be like that, maybe. I'm sure it could be sooner. The end of this privilege could be sooner. And then we will see, right, how actually the music is, right? Because as I told you, we see the expanded music scene exist in geographies, in societies where it's not financially supported. So actually, it proves that it can exist if musicians are driven to create such a music. Let's see what I can just imagine, right? What could be expanded music scene in Europe when, let's say, one day we say, okay, no more privilege. Okay, now you do on your own, right? Like this in other geographies, and like it is with other music scenes, even in Europe, right? And then we will see, right, how much it is all about money and how much it's about passion to create something.
Okay, I don't know if because there's of course other sections for other interviewers, so we can keep talking. But I think yes, that's true. We'll see. We'll see if we we probably won't live that long, but it is definitely an interesting moment where it's kind of, I want to call it transition because we're always in some kind of transition, but where because of internet and because of the um, access to technology and various means of distribution, whatever we have also way more, if we choose, of course, we have more awareness of the scope of practices, approaches. We are aware of more like talent that lives all around the globe. We are coming from Brazil, a country so rich in musical cultures and influences that I follow a few artists and I'm just so amazed with like what kind of interesting music they make based on the environment, the things that they heard from these different music languages. They still make experimental music, but it's just happily non-Western, and that's great.
I would
So
like to make one comment on what I said, right? In order to be more clear. I said that we don't have function in society if you look on the big picture. And that on the big picture that we don't care about audience. That's true. But I would say there is a lot of, because this is like institutionally built mechanisms. The scene in Europe is built like that, right? And it's built on that privilege. And this privilege requires, or no, not requires, it allows. But I wouldn't say that just there are, I think, good examples when at least composers trying to build pieces which reflects on what's going on in societies. Even maybe music is not the best medium for that, right? I just I know that Alexander Schubert, one of the latest work is about all this. At least what I saw from the descriptions, I have never seen it. It was about all this post-human paradigm, right? Which is of course very important. I see some works of what is his name? He knows. Okay, where you use a lot of ideas of ecological catastrophes and that in play with that in music. So that's of course happening. Is that what I want to say? Yes, I would say on the big picture, we don't have role and we don't try to change society. We are more driven to ourself and to be more innovative, etc. We don't take in general we are built like that we don't need huge. We need a feedback, of course, but it's not built in institutionally like in other music styles, right? Which cannot exist without audience. Expanded music can exist without audience easily, right? So, but about what I want to say, but there are, of course, practices and composers, musicians. Who cares, right? That's the important thing. So I'm not saying that so that all is in dark colors.
And okay, so you said expanded music can exist without audience. Okay. And can it
Yeah,
exist
of
with,
course. You just you get grants and that's it, right? And create your music. You get commissioned. That's
or not? Or you
what.
do it? Yeah. And can, because I'm a performer primarily, but I'm interested in like the role of, because we said, okay, it can exist without audience, therefore probably doesn't have the live presentation component. So it doesn't, I mean, obviously it can be recorded as a video and that still can have performance, but what 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 is the relation between expanded music and performance then? That is, especially from this kind of Western perspective where that music, whatever, I mean, of course, except electroacoustic music, but usually it's uh, formulated around this performer composer paradigm as music that is written for it to be performed by the humans, and so on. I mean, of course, it just depends on the medium, right? If somebody chooses to make a digital project, yeah, but I'm just interested as a final question about that role and the way you see it.
No, I think there's a lot of happening. I think there is. We see some composers who previously, expanded music composers who created their own ensembles. We see that a lot of yeah, Janis Kirkits there, I think, has Stefan Prince didn't create it, but he's running ensemble. Sandris Murins has some initiative, and you will find on many. I think if I'm not sure about Alexander Show, but maybe as well. I think I need to check a lot of them. And then there is second that you um, perform on your own. Jennifer Walsh performs on the Mommy Adachi performs his own. So there is a lot of things because there is, of course, what you said, right? That link is very interesting. The link is because musician and ensemble is gatekeeper, whether music will be performed or not. And then it's usually when it happens with musical innovation, how you deal with gatekeeper. One is that you create your own ensemble. Then you alternative you become on your own ultimate performer, at least at some part, at some part in your career. You can create alternative things, right? When you don't need this like. But meanwhile, it's this one thing. But meanwhile, it's become more complicated and more performance related because it's not only sometimes it's not only that you need a performer, right? But you need a performer and dancer, um, like yeah, Scary Kids piece and mute, where there's three dancers and three performers, and they interact together. So you need different skills, right? So I think that it's interesting. Meanwhile, it's going everything away to create alternatives to this gate to musician as gatekeeper. How right own ensembles, right? Or when you perform on your own, and meanwhile you go into more complicated constellations with collaborations, which create which requires more complement. So it's very diverse. I think it's very diverse. The new diverse practices.
Okay, because expanded music in this, I guess your understanding has all these different elements, that is just not purely attached to the practice of sound, which then means there must be like expanded skill sets in order to make expanded music. Sometimes that these expanded skills surpass the, container of skills within one single human being. So it's a quite sometimes, at least the way I see it, is like a very collaborative practice. And even if the idea comes from someone, the production of that piece or whatever is then a result of like a teamwork of multiple people with various skill sets, at least.
It's like composers is very important for them is to learn how to work in a team, how to lead the team, how to collaborate. This is completely new. Of course, this is only one new competence, but this is a very, very important competence. Second is, of course, coding. So you need to do that. Most of composers code something at some part of the videos. And then, of course, always learn new because this is completely different. So it's maybe this is a world where signature doesn't matter so much. So you don't need to you find your thing and replicate it. It's a world where you need to each time surprise or surprise yourself and maybe some audience, some community, let's say some other members of the community. So that means you always need to create some kind of new ideas, new combinations, and it requires you to always learn quickly, right? Learn quickly things which you don't know, but which you want to know, which is needed. And I think, yeah, and then dealing with this uncertainty and with these expanded risks, which I suppose that have so big, maybe other components.
So you mentioned something like signature. I guess you mean like a single author concept, and that is not so important. I think it's problematic because quite a lot of the funding, which is of course a result. I mean, it's like in a feedback loop of like the hierarchy of value, the value system that we have surrounding the formation of work and distribution of resources and so on. It's quite slow at catching up with this idea that work is quite often collective. Like I always am quite amazed by film credits because, of course, film is such a huge production, and I'm always amazed to see the number of names of human beings involved in various ways, and something that, of course, like if Alexander Schubert produces, and you have all these different people involved. Yes, I've seen the credits, but overall, I think because of the way funding works, and we still think of the role of the composer, it's rare still to see teams or collectives behind a work. And that comes from the kind of really ingrained concept in Western, let's call it art music, where the composers was paramount, and there was this kind of trickle down hierarchy of value. Of course, composers score performer, or other also of course people in between, but overall I think expanded music depends of course how it's done, but yes, I mean you need so expanded skill set, and you need I think expanded understanding of the creation of this music. And I don't mean just within people, but also within states, within funding body, within festivals. Just the way we think about how creativity comes about. I think uh, AI is quite an interesting just like reality check, because of course it's a machine that learns based on all the information that we feed it, and then it's based on that creates something or knows something or whatever. Yeah, so we then probably would also have to think about expanded music from that perspective of hierarchy of value that we attach to the role of the composer. Because there would be also, of course, pieces that would like to integrate the audience more, give audience, sometimes like more role, and then it just becomes, of course, somebody as a facilitator, somebody as but not so much as a, author or something. Yeah.
Uh, this I will next interviews. So I will talk about. I think there are different kind of hats and
Oh, good segue.
different kind of hats which wear different kind of composers. Yes, and I think
Yeah.
we are wearing different kind of hats, and so we do different practices. But I think just it's multi there is huge variety. It's not any one type of creating. There's many types.
Yeah. All right. So looking forward to the next interview then. Good segue.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I
Yeah,
think I have
very much.
at least, yes, no more questions. Okay. Have a
Sure.
good day. Bye.